Pretend you love me for 5 minutes, Olivia Hart whispered, and for the first time in his life, the Alpha King looked afraid. Snow drifted silently beyond the towering palace windows, turning the midnight sky into a blur of silver and white. The kingdom slept beneath a blanket of winter, but inside the royal infirmary, no one dared breathe too loudly. Every healer stood frozen. Every servant lowered their eyes. Because Alexander Blackwood, the most powerful Alpha King in the Northern Territories, was sitting beside a single bed, holding the hand of a woman everyone had forgotten. Olivia's fingers felt cold in his grasp. Not lifeless. Not yet. Just tired. So unbearably tired. The fire crackling in the corner could not warm her pale skin. The thick wool blankets piled around her shoulders could not stop the quiet trembling that came and went like distant waves. For months, she had hidden how weak she was becoming. For months, she had smiled politely, attended royal dinners, thanked servants who barely acknowledged her existence, and walked through endless marble halls as if her heart wasn't breaking a little more each day. No one noticed. At least, that was what she believed. Her eyes slowly lifted toward Alexander. Even now, he looked impossibly distant. Dark hair. Sharp features. Silver eyes that had made rival alphas surrender without a fight. The entire kingdom feared him. Respected him. Obeyed him. Yet Olivia had spent 3 years married to him without ever understanding what he truly felt. Maybe because he rarely smiled. Maybe because duty always came first. Maybe because she had convinced herself long ago that a forgotten Omega could never be loved by a king. A faint smile touched her lips. 5 minutes, she repeated softly. That's all I want. Alexander's jaw tightened. The room seemed to grow smaller around him. He had faced wars. Political betrayals. Famines. Border disputes. None of them had prepared him for this moment. None of them had prepared him for the sound of her voice growing weaker with every passing day. Olivia looked toward the frost gathering along the glass windows. Just pretend, she whispered. Pretend I mattered to you. Pretend. I was someone worth missing. A servant near the doorway quietly wiped away tears. One of the healers looked down at the floor. They all knew the truth. They all knew what Olivia never had. Because for years, the entire palace had watched Alexander's eyes follow her whenever she left a room. They had seen him cancel meetings to make certain she arrived home safely during storms. They had seen gifts appear anonymously outside her chamber door. They had seen the king remember every small detail she ever mentioned. Her favorite flowers. Her favorite tea. The books she borrowed from the library. The songs she hummed when she thought no one was listening. But Alexander had never spoken the words. And Olivia had never asked. Until tonight. The king lowered his head, pressing her hand gently between both of his. His voice emerged rougher than anyone had ever heard before. Olivia, her eyes fluttered toward him. Hope and sadness lived together inside that gaze. The kind of sadness that came from believing you had never been chosen. Never been seen. Never been loved. And as snow continued falling beyond the windows, Alexander realized the cruelest enemy he had ever faced was not fate. It was silence. Because the woman he had loved for years was asking him to pretend. For several long seconds, Alexander could not answer. The silence stretched between them like a fragile thread, and Olivia mistook it for hesitation. That hurt more than she expected. She had prepared herself for many things during the past few months. She had prepared herself for weakness. For lonely nights. For watching winter arrive from behind palace windows while feeling herself slowly fade. But she had not prepared herself for hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope made people believe in impossible things. A small cough escaped her, and she turned her face toward the firelight, embarrassed by the tears gathering in her eyes. I am sorry, she whispered. That was selfish of me. Alexander immediately shook his head. No, the single word came out almost desperate. Olivia blinked. She had never heard that tone from him before. Not once in 3 years. The Alpha King was always composed. Always measured. Always impossible to read. Yet tonight something inside him seemed to be unraveling. "You do not have to apologize for anything," he said quietly. She managed a faint smile. "You say that now because everyone is watching." The words were gentle, but they landed heavily. Alexander looked around the room. Every servant quickly lowered their gaze. Every healer pretended to study their notes. Yet none of them left. None of them could look away from what was happening. Olivia followed his gaze. "They feel sorry for me." "They do not." "They do." Her voice remained soft. "I know what people say. Forgotten Omega. Invisible Luna. The Queen nobody notices." Alexander closed his eyes briefly. Every title felt like a failure. Not hers. His. Because he remembered the first time he had seen her. 3 years ago, standing alone in the grand hall while nobles competed for attention and influence. Olivia had not been trying to impress anyone. She had been helping an elderly servant gather dropped papers while everyone else walked past. She had smiled at the woman. Thanked her. Treated her like she mattered. Alexander had noticed immediately. He had noticed everything after that. The way she remembered names. The way she paused to listen when others spoke. The way she carried kindness through rooms that had forgotten how to value it. But he had convinced himself there would be time. Time to explain. Time to tell her what she meant to him. Time to stop being king long enough to simply be a husband. Now that time felt painfully small. Olivia shifted beneath the blankets. "Do you know what I used to wish for?" she asked. Alexander looked back at her. "What?" She laughed softly. "Nothing dramatic." Her eyes drifted toward the falling snow outside. "Just breakfast." He frowned slightly. "Breakfast?" "One morning together." Her smile trembled. "No council meetings. No advisors. No royal duties. Just one ordinary breakfast where you looked at me and saw your wife." The confession struck him harder than any accusation ever could. Because he remembered every breakfast he had missed. Every invitation politely declined. Every moment duty had stolen. Olivia sighed and settled deeper into her pillow. "Funny, is not it?" she murmured. "People spend their lives dreaming of grand romances. I only wanted pancakes and coffee." A tear slipped down Alexander's cheek before he could stop it. The room fell completely silent. Because in all the years anyone had known him, nobody had ever seen the Alpha King cry. Alexander did not try to hide the tear. He did not wipe it away. He simply sat there, still holding Olivia's hand, while the entire room struggled to understand what they were witnessing. The Alpha King who had negotiated treaties, commanded armies, and stood unshaken through every crisis now looked like a man confronting something far more terrifying than responsibility. Olivia stared at him in disbelief. For a moment she wondered if the firelight was playing tricks on her eyes. Then another tear followed the first. Her breath caught. "Alexander," she whispered. He lowered his gaze. The sound of her voice seemed to pull him back from somewhere far away. "I am sorry," he said quietly. Olivia blinked. Of all the things she expected to hear tonight, those words were not among them. "Sorry for what?" A faint laugh escaped her. "For not eating breakfast with me?" But Alexander did not smile. That frightened her more than anything. "For every moment you thought you were alone," he answered. The room grew impossibly still. Olivia searched his face, trying to understand. For years she had studied him from a distance, hoping to find clues hidden behind his calm expression. Yet now that he was finally revealing emotion, she felt more confused than ever. "I was alone," she said gently. "Most of the time." The words were not cruel. They were simply honest. Alexander closed his eyes. Honest words often hurt the most. Because he remembered every winter ball where nobles crowded around him while Olivia stood quietly near the edge of the room. He remembered every celebration where advisors monopolized his attention. Every evening when he returned too late. Every promise to spend more time together that had been postponed until tomorrow. Tomorrow. The most dangerous word in the world. Olivia shifted slightly, watching snow drift beyond the glass. Do you remember? Our first spring in the palace, she asked. Alexander nodded immediately. Of course he remembered. He remembered everything. The rose garden, she continued softly. I waited there almost every afternoon for 2 weeks. His chest tightened. He remembered that too. He had sent flowers anonymously each day because a border dispute had trapped him in endless meetings. He had believed the flowers would be enough until he could come himself. They had not been enough. I thought you forgot, Olivia admitted. Eventually I stopped waiting. Alexander looked down at their joined hands. The memory felt unbearable now. Because he had stood at his office window more than once, watching her from a distance as she sat alone among blooming roses. He had wanted to go to her. Every time. Yet duty always found another reason to keep him away. Another meeting. Another decision. Another crisis. He had convinced himself sacrifice was part of leadership. What he never realized was that Olivia had been making sacrifices too. Quiet ones. Invisible ones. The kind nobody applauded. A faint smile touched Olivia's lips. It is strange, she murmured. I spent years trying not to need you. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. And somehow I never stopped. Alexander felt his heart break all over again. Because for the first time he understood the truth. Olivia had never doubted her love for him. She had only doubted that anyone could possibly love her back. The confession lingered between them like the last light of sunset refusing to disappear beyond the horizon. Olivia looked away first. It felt safer that way. Safer than looking directly at the man she had loved for 3 years. Safer than hoping. Hope had always been dangerous. Outside, snow continued drifting across the palace grounds, covering pathways and gardens in quiet white silence. Inside the room, the fire crackled softly, its warmth unable to reach the ache that had settled deep inside her heart. Alexander studied her face as though trying to memorize every detail. The curve of her smile. The faint shadows beneath her eyes. The way her fingers instinctively curled around the edge of the blanket when she felt nervous. Small things. Precious things. Things he should have cherished openly long ago. Olivia noticed his stare and forced a gentle laugh. You are looking at me as though I am about to disappear. The humor in her voice faded when he did not laugh with her. Something tightened inside her chest. Alexander? He swallowed before speaking. Do you remember the first gift I ever gave you? Olivia blinked in surprise. You never gave me a gift. A flicker of pain crossed his expression. The silver music box. She stared at him. For several seconds she could not answer. Then realization slowly dawned. That was from you? Alexander nodded. Olivia felt her breath catch. 3 winters ago, a small music box had appeared outside her chamber without a note. She had spent countless nights listening to its melody. It had been her favorite possession in the entire palace. I thought it came from one of the servants, she whispered. No, his voice was barely audible. It came from me. Olivia stared at him in disbelief. Memories began surfacing one after another. The books that mysteriously appeared after she mentioned wanting to read them. The shawl left outside her door during an especially cold winter. The rare white roses delivered every spring. She had spent years wondering who had been so kind. Alexander lowered his gaze. I was never very good with words. A servant quietly turned away, pretending to adjust the curtains. Several healers exchanged emotional glances. They knew exactly how many gifts had passed through the palace over the years. Olivia looked overwhelmed. "Why would you hide it?" she asked. The question seemed to strike him deeply. Because he did not have a good answer. Because somewhere along the way he had mistaken silence for strength. Because expressing love had always felt more difficult than carrying responsibility. Because he had believed actions would speak loudly enough. They had not. "I thought you knew," he admitted. Olivia closed her eyes. A tear slipped free before she could stop it. "I never knew anything," she whispered. "I only knew that I loved you." The words shattered whatever composure Alexander still possessed. He lifted her hand carefully and pressed it against his forehead. Not as a king. Not as an alpha. Simply as a man carrying years of regret. For the first time since entering the room, Olivia saw something she had never seen in him before. Vulnerability. And suddenly she realized the distance between them had not been built by a lack of feeling. It had been built by two lonely hearts standing on opposite sides of the same silence. Olivia did not realize she was crying until Alexander gently brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The gesture was so small, so natural, and yet it felt unfamiliar. Not because she had never wanted it, but because she had stopped believing it would ever happen. The room around them faded into the background. The servants, the healers, the firelight, even the falling snow beyond the windows seemed distant compared to the quiet ache growing between two people who had spent years misunderstanding the same love. Olivia looked down at their joined hands. "All this time," she whispered. "All those gifts." Alexander nodded. "All those years," she continued. "You never said anything." His expression tightened. "I should have." The answer came immediately. No excuses. No defenses. Just truth. Olivia stared at him. She had imagined this conversation 100 different ways over the years. In every version, she was angry. Hurt. Ready to demand answers. Yet now that the moment had arrived, she only felt tired. Tired of carrying sadness. Tired of carrying doubts. Tired of wondering why she had never seemed important enough. "Do you know what I thought?" she asked quietly. Alexander waited. "I thought you regretted marrying me." The words landed heavily. One of the healers lowered her head. A servant near the doorway covered his mouth. Because everyone knew how wrong that belief was. Everyone except Olivia. Alexander looked as though the statement physically hurt him. "Never." The word came out instantly. Stronger than anything he had said all night. Olivia blinked. He squeezed her hand. "Not for a single day." Her breath caught. For years she had secretly wondered if he wished he had chosen someone else. Someone stronger. Someone more admired. Someone who belonged naturally beside a king. Alexander seemed to read every thought crossing her face. "You think I wanted another Luna?" She did not answer. She did not have to. The silence spoke for her. "Olivia," he said softly, "there has never been anyone else." The honesty in his voice made her heart ache. Because she believed him. For the first time, she truly believed him. Yet belief brought a different kind of sorrow. All those lost years. All those lonely mornings. All those evenings spent staring at an empty chair across the dinner table. None of them had been necessary. "We wasted so much time," she whispered. Alexander lowered his gaze. "I know." Outside, the wind brushed softly against the palace walls. Winter seemed endless tonight. Olivia closed her eyes. Memories drifted through her mind. The music box. The roses. The books. The anonymous kindness she had treasured without knowing their source. Suddenly every memory looked different. Every mystery had the same answer. Alexander. Tears gathered again. Not because she felt unloved anymore. But because she was finally discovering how deeply she had been loved all along. When she opened her eyes again, she found him watching her with a tenderness he had never allowed himself to show before. It was almost overwhelming. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Olivia managed a fragile smile. "I am thinking that if you had told me any of this 3 years ago," she said softly, "I probably would have spent a lot less time crying alone." For the first time that night, a faint laugh escaped Alexander. It was quiet. Imperfect. Full of regret. Yet hearing it filled the room with warmth stronger than the fire ever could. The sound of Alexander's laughter lingered only for a moment, but Olivia held on to it as though it were something precious. In 3 years of marriage, she could count on one hand the number of times she had seen him truly smile. Hearing him laugh felt almost impossible. For a brief moment, the weight pressing against her chest seemed lighter. The room felt warmer. The distance between them felt smaller. Alexander gently brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face. The movement was so natural that neither of them seemed to realize what had happened until afterward. Olivia's eyes widened slightly. Alexander's hand paused. Then slowly, he lowered it. A faint blush touched Olivia's cheeks. Not from romance. Not from embarrassment. From the strange realization that this simple tenderness was something she had secretly wanted for years. "You know," she said softly, "I used to imagine conversations like this." Alexander looked at her carefully. "Did you?" She nodded. "Usually when I could not sleep." Her smile carried a hint of sadness. "I would pretend you finally had time to sit with me." Alexander lowered his gaze. Every word felt like another reminder of everything he had missed. "And what would we talk about?" he asked quietly. Olivia thought for a moment. "Nothing important." Her eyes drifted toward the dancing firelight. The weather. Books. Which flowers would bloom first in spring? She laughed softly. Normal things. The answer nearly broke him. Because he had spent years handling matters that affected thousands of lives while overlooking the simple moments that mattered most to the one person waiting for him. A sudden knock interrupted the silence. One of the senior healers stepped forward carrying a leather-bound journal. The older woman hesitated before speaking. "Your Majesty." Alexander looked up. The healer's expression was troubled. "We found this among Lady Olivia's personal belongings." Olivia immediately recognized the journal. Her heart skipped. "You should not read that," she said quickly. The healer looked uncomfortable. "I apologize, my lady. We discovered it while organizing your chambers." Alexander accepted the journal without understanding why Olivia suddenly looked nervous. The worn cover showed years of careful use. Nothing about it seemed unusual. Until he opened the first page. The room fell silent. Olivia closed her eyes. She already knew what he would find. Dates. Thoughts. Private memories. Years of loneliness carefully hidden behind polite smiles. Alexander's eyes moved across the page. The first entry was from nearly 3 years ago. The day after their wedding. "I think he looked at me today. I know that sounds silly because we are married. But it felt nice anyway." Alexander froze. He turned another page. "Today the roses arrived again. Whoever keeps sending them has excellent timing. Sometimes I wonder if they know I needed cheering up." Another page. "The council meeting lasted 12 hours. He skipped dinner again. I hope he remembered to eat something." Another page. "Everyone says I should stop hoping. I wish hope listened better." Alexander's hands began to tremble. Each sentence felt like a window into a life he thought he understood. A life he suddenly realized he had barely seen at all. And as he continued reading, one terrible truth became impossible to ignore. While he had spent years loving Olivia in silence, she had spent those same years quietly teaching herself how to live without being loved back. Alexander could not stop reading. Page after page revealed pieces of Olivia's heart that she had never shared with anyone. The handwriting changed over the years. Some entries were hopeful. Some were lonely. Some were so heartbreakingly optimistic that they left a hollow ache in his chest. He turned another page. Today he remembered my birthday. Or at least I think he did. Someone left my favorite tea outside my door this morning. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was not. Either way, it made me smile. Alexander closed his eyes briefly. It had not been a coincidence. He remembered searching 3 different merchants to find that tea because she had once mentioned it reminded her of home. Another page. Winter is always easier when the roses arrive. Whoever sends them never forgets. The words blurred for a moment as emotion tightened his throat. Olivia watched him quietly. She had never expected anyone to read those pages. They had been conversations with herself. Small pieces of hope preserved during years when she felt invisible. The silence in the room deepened. Even the fire seemed quieter now. Alexander reached a page written only a few months earlier. This one made his entire body go still. If I disappear one day, I hope he knows I never blamed him. The sentence struck harder than anything before it. Olivia immediately looked away. She knew exactly which entry he had found. She remembered writing it late at night when sleep refused to come. Alexander slowly lifted his eyes toward her. There was disbelief in them. Pain. Regret. And something else. Fear. Real fear. You knew, he said quietly. Olivia swallowed. I suspected. His voice grew softer. How long? She hesitated. Several months. A collective breath swept through the room. One of the healers looked down, unable to meet the king's eyes. Alexander immediately understood. Everyone here had known except him. Everyone. The realization was devastating. Why did nobody tell me? His question was not angry. It was wounded. The senior healer stepped forward carefully. She asked us not to. Olivia closed her eyes. Alexander. But he was already looking back at the journal. Another page. Another truth. I think the healers are worried. They keep looking at me with sad eyes. I wish they would stop. It makes leaving harder. His hands trembled. Leaving. She had written about leaving as though it were inevitable. As though she had already accepted it. As though she had been preparing herself while he remained completely unaware. For the first time all night, Alexander looked truly shaken. Not like a king facing a challenge. Like a husband realizing how much time he had lost. He carefully closed the journal and held it against his chest. Then he stood. The movement startled everyone. Olivia looked up in confusion. Alexander? He stepped closer to her bed. Snow continued falling beyond the windows. The fire crackled softly. Somewhere deep within the palace, a clock chimed the late hour. Yet in that moment nothing mattered except the woman before him. He reached for her hand again and held it with absolute certainty. You are not leaving, he said. Olivia saw the determination in his eyes and felt her heart ache. Because she had never seen him look so certain of anything. And for the first time in years, a small fragile part of her dared to wonder if hope might not be dangerous after all. Olivia wanted to believe him. More than anything, she wanted to believe the certainty in his voice. Yet years of disappointment did not disappear in a single night. They lingered quietly inside her. Whispering old doubts she had carried for far too long. She looked at Alexander and saw determination. She saw regret. She saw love she had never recognized before. But she also saw exhaustion. The kind that came from realizing something precious had nearly slipped away unnoticed. You always sound convincing when you make royal decrees, she said softly. A faint smile touched her lips. That does not mean the universe listens. Several people in the room smiled sadly at the comment. Alexander did not. He remained focused entirely on her. This is not a decree. His voice was calm. This is a promise. Olivia lowered her eyes. Promises. There had been so many promises over the years. Most had not been broken intentionally. They had simply been buried beneath obligations, responsibilities, and endless demands that came with ruling an entire kingdom. She understood that. She always had. Perhaps that was why she never complained. The silence stretched between them until one of the healers stepped forward hesitantly. "Your Majesty," the woman said. "There may be something you should know." Alexander immediately looked toward her. The healer exchanged nervous glances with the others before continuing. "Lady Olivia's condition has puzzled us for months. We believed we understood it. Now we are no longer certain." Olivia frowned. "What does that mean?" The healer took a careful breath. "The symptoms have never fully matched the diagnosis." The room became still again. Alexander's attention sharpened instantly. "Explain." The healer nodded. "We believed the illness was progressing naturally. But several recent tests suggest there may be another cause. Something hidden." Hope flickered across the room so quickly that nobody wanted to acknowledge it. Hope could be dangerous. Hope could break hearts. Yet it was impossible to ignore. Olivia stared at the healer. "Are you saying you were wrong?" "I am saying we may not have all the answers." Alexander immediately stepped closer. "How soon can you investigate?" The healers exchanged surprised looks. "Tonight, if necessary," one replied. "Then do it." The authority in his voice returned, but this time it felt different. Not cold. Not distant. Driven by devotion. Olivia watched him in silence. For years she had wondered what it might feel like to be someone's first priority. Tonight she was beginning to understand. Outside, snow continued falling across the kingdom. Deep within the palace, messengers were quietly summoned. Ancient records were requested from royal archives. Scholars were awakened from their beds. Healers began gathering notes and reports that had accumulated over months. The entire palace seemed to come alive around a single purpose. Olivia noticed the activity and shook her head weakly. "Alexander, this is unnecessary." He looked at her as though she had said something impossible. "Nothing about you is unnecessary." The words settled over the room like warmth. Olivia felt tears gathering again. Not because she was sad. Not because she was afraid. Because for the first time in years, she no longer felt forgotten. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, while winter covered the kingdom in white, a future she thought had already disappeared quietly began finding its way back to her. The following morning arrived quietly. Sunlight spilled across fresh snow, turning the palace grounds into a sea of silver and gold. For the first time in months, Olivia woke to voices filled with cautious excitement rather than concern. Throughout the night, scholars had searched ancient records while healers compared forgotten notes. By dawn, they had discovered something no one expected. Olivia was not fading from an incurable illness. She was carrying the effects of an ancient dormant bond, a rare condition that weakened over time when emotional connection between destined mates remained unspoken and unresolved. The revelation stunned everyone. Alexander listened in complete silence as the explanation unfolded. Every symptom matched. Every unanswered question finally made sense. The healer smiled through tears as she delivered the final conclusion. "This condition can be reversed." The room erupted with relief. Several servants openly cried. One healer laughed for the first time in weeks. Olivia simply sat there, unable to process the words. Reversed. The future she had slowly been saying goodbye to was suddenly standing in front of her once again. Her eyes drifted toward Alexander. He looked as though the weight of the entire world had just been lifted from his shoulders. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Olivia laughed softly. It was small. Fragile. Beautiful. I spent months preparing farewell letters. Alexander moved closer. Then we will burn them. She smiled. That seems dramatic. I am a king, he replied. I am allowed occasional dramatic moments. The room filled with gentle laughter. Days passed. Then weeks. Strength slowly returned to Olivia. Color returned to her cheeks. The palace itself seemed different. Not because the walls had changed, but because silence no longer lived between them. They shared breakfast together. Real breakfasts. Pancakes, coffee, fresh fruit, and conversations about absolutely nothing important. They walked through the gardens. Read books beside the fire. Watched snowstorms from the same window instead of separate rooms. And for the first time, the kingdom saw something it had never witnessed before. Their king was happy. One spring afternoon, months later, Olivia stood among blooming white roses while Alexander joined her carrying a familiar silver music box. The same one she had treasured for years. The melody drifted softly through the garden. Olivia smiled. Do you remember what I asked for that night? Alexander nodded immediately. 5 minutes. She laughed. I thought that was all I could have. He reached for her hand. The same hand he had nearly lost. The same hand he now held every chance he got. His silver eyes reflected sunlight and something even brighter. Peace. Olivia, he said quietly. You asked me to pretend. Emotion filled her chest. Yes. Alexander shook his head. That was the problem. She looked at him curiously. He lifted her hand to his lips and smiled. I never needed to pretend. Tears filled her eyes as understanding settled gently around her heart. Not because she had finally found love. Because it had been there all along. Hidden behind silence. Waiting patiently to be seen. And surrounded by roses, sunlight, and a future neither of them would ever take. For granted again, Olivia finally believed the truth she had spent years doubting. She had never been forgotten.